The day started like any other, only it wasn't. It was the day my world shattered into a million tiny, glittery pieces, like a dropped ornament at Christmas. Except this ornament was my life, and the glitter was broken glass, and Christmas was cancelled forever. I woke up, the expensive silk sheets tangled around my legs, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our grand bedroom. Sarah wasn't there. That wasn't unusual. She was an early riser, always off to her yoga or meditation, or just out on the patio sipping artisanal coffee, while I still dreamt of power suits and stock market victories. I stretched, yawned, and reached for my phone. No new messages from her, which was odd. She usually sent a sweet, "Good morning, my love," or a reminder about some event. I swung my legs out of bed, feeling the cool marble under my bare feet. A silence hung in the air, heavier than usual. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping house. It was the absolute void of an empty one. I walked through the sprawling mansion, calling her name. "Sarah, honey, are you in the garden?" The only reply was the gentle hum of the central air conditioning. The kitchen was pristine, untouched. Her favorite mug wasn't on the counter. Her car was gone from the driveway. My heart started to beat a little faster, a tiny drum solo of dread. This wasn't right. Sarah never just left without a word. She was meticulous, thoughtful, almost excessively so. I started to check the usual spots. Her walk-in closet. Empty. Except for a few things she never really wore. Relics from a past life, perhaps. Her jewelry box was bare. The expensive luggage she adored was missing. That's when the true panic set in, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. She wasn't just out for a morning stroll. She was gone. Then I saw it. Tucked neatly on my side of the bed on the pillow she had vacated was a single folded piece of paper. It wasn't a fancy note, no expensive stationery, just a plain white sheet torn from a notepad. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Her handwriting, usually so elegant, was hurried, almost frantic. "Can't do this anymore, I am sorry. Please don't look for me. I am with Leo, my gardener." The name hit me like a physical blow. Leo. Not a colleague, not an old flame, not some new stranger she met online. Leo. Our gardener. Quiet man who spent his days meticulously pruning our roses, taming the wild hedges, and making our sprawling estate look like something out of a magazine. The man I barely ever spoke to, beyond a quick nod and a muttered, "Looks good, Leo," as I hurried off to work. Leo, who was always covered in dirt and smelled faintly of earth and cut grass. Leo, who I had not paid in 3 months, the unpaid wages. The secret I had been carrying heavy and toxic for what felt like an eternity. 3 months. That's a quarter of a year. That's a lot of money for someone like Leo. Someone who worked for an hourly wage, who probably relied on every single dollar to make ends meet. I had been meaning to catch up. I really had. Things had been tight. Tighter than I ever let on. My business, once a soaring eagle, had been clipping its own wings, slowly, painfully. I'd made some bad investments, some even worse decisions. The money was flowing out faster than it was coming in. So I'd started cutting corners. First, small things. Then, bigger ones. And Leo's pay, his weekly invoice, had become a casualty of my spiraling financial panic. I just kept pushing it off, telling myself I'd get to it next week, next month, when a big deal closed, when things turned around. They hadn't. Now that secret, that gnawing shame, collided with the explosive revelation that Sarah, my beautiful, elegant wife, had run off with the very man I was stiffing. It was a cruel, twisted joke. A cosmic punchline delivered by the universe. He didn't tell her, did he, Leo? Did he tell Sarah that I, her successful, seemingly affluent husband, hadn't paid him a dime in 90 days? Did she know I was a financial fraud, living a lie, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy while still driving a luxury car, and living in a mansion I could barely afford to maintain? Or did she just fall for the rugged, silent type, who spent his days under the sun, smelling of fresh earth instead of stale ambition? The thought spiraled, a dizzying whirlwind of questions and accusations. Was it a plot? Did Leo seduce her, knowing my vulnerability, knowing my hidden shame? Or was he just a convenient escape, a simple man offering a simpler life, far away from my complicated, debt-ridden existence? The note was so brief, so cold. I can't do this anymore. What couldn't she do? Live with me, live with my secrets, or just live this life, the one I had built, which was now crumbling around me like a sandcastle in the tide. I sank onto the bed, the note crumpled in my hand, the silk sheets suddenly feeling like a mockery. The silence in the house was deafening now, filled only with the frantic drum of my own heart. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, a different interpretation of the words. But there was none. Sarah was gone, with Leo, and the weight of those 3 unpaid months, a burden I thought only I carried, suddenly felt like the heaviest, most humiliating secret in the world, exposed for all to see, especially for the woman who had just walked out of my life, hand in hand with the man who was owed my money. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was public humiliation, a betrayal wrapped in a financial disaster, a personal failure magnified by a very specific, very painful detail. My world was gone, and I didn't even know where to begin picking up the pieces. All I could think was, did he tell her? He must have. Why else would she leave with him? Why else would she leave me? The air conditioning hummed, a lonely sound in the cavernous house. Outside, the sun shone brightly, mocking me with its warmth. Perfectly manicured garden, Leo's handiwork, lay bathed in sunlight, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded within these walls. It looked serene, beautiful, a perfect backdrop to a perfectly broken life. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the image of Sarah and Leo, together somewhere, and the image of my bank account, bleeding money, slowly, relentlessly. One was a betrayal of the heart, the other a betrayal of my own make. And somehow they had collided, leaving me utterly, completely, devastatingly alone. This was not how my story was supposed to go, not even close. The memory of the last 3 months was a blur of spreadsheets and increasingly frantic phone calls. It hadn't happened overnight. This slide into financial quicksand. It was a slow, insidious creep, like a vine growing silently up the side of a grand old house. Beautiful at first, then suffocating. My business, a tech startup I'd poured my soul into, had hit a wall. A major client pulled out. A key investment round fell through. Suddenly, the projections that had looked so promising were just numbers on a page, disconnected from reality. I was good at faking it though. That was my superpower, my curse. I could walk into a room, crack a confident smile, talk about innovation and growth, all while my stomach churned with anxiety. Sarah, bless her optimistic heart, never seemed to notice. Or maybe she did, and I was just too blind to see it. We maintained our lifestyle, the fancy dinners, the exotic vacations, the designer clothes. It was all credit, all smoke and mirrors. But the house, this grand, sprawling symbol of my supposed success, needed constant upkeep, and that meant the garden. And that meant Leo. Leo had been with us for 5 years. He wasn't just a gardener, He was an institution, reliable, quiet, almost invisible. He arrived before dawn, worked diligently through the day, and left without a fuss. He never asked for anything beyond his agreed-upon weekly pay. His invoices were always neat, precise. For the first 4 years, I paid them without a second thought. Then, 3 months ago, the first invoice landed on my desk. I looked at the number, then at my dwindling bank balance, then at the pile of more pressing bills. Mortgage, utilities, car payments for 2 luxury vehicles. Leo's pay, while substantial, felt like a luxury I could temporarily defer. He won't notice for a bit, I told myself, justifying the decision. He's probably got savings. He's got other clients. I convinced myself it was a temporary measure. A few weeks tops I'd catch up. I always did. Except this time I didn't. The weeks bled into months. Each invoice from Leo was tucked away in a drawer. A growing stack of unspoken promises and unfulfilled obligations. Each time I saw him diligently working in the garden, I felt a fresh stab of guilt. But I kept my face blank, my greeting casual. He never mentioned it, never asked. His silence was both a relief and a torment. Sarah, meanwhile, was oblivious to my internal turmoil. She worried about things like the quality of organic produce or the latest art exhibit. We talked, but not about money. We talked about her day, my day, our plans. But the deeper conversations, the ones about fears and vulnerabilities, had become rare. I had become good at hiding things from her. Not just the money, but the gnawing self-doubt, the feeling of being a fraud. I didn't want her to see me as anything less than the strong, successful man she married. I thought I was protecting her. Now I knew I was just isolating myself, building walls I couldn't breach. Looking back, there were signs, small things I dismissed. Sarah spent more time in the garden lately. She'd say she was reading or just enjoying the fresh air, but I'd sometimes see her chatting with Leo, casual conversations from a distance. He's telling me about the new roses, she'd say, or Leo thinks the azaleas need more water. I never thought anything of it. He was our gardener, she was the lady of the house. A natural interaction, professional and polite. But were they? I remember one afternoon, walking past the kitchen window. I saw them. Sarah was laughing. A genuine, uninhibited laugh. I hadn't heard from her in a while. Leo was smiling, a rare sight from his usually stoic face. They were standing near the fountain, talking about some new plant. Their heads were close, almost conspiratorial. I dismissed it as harmless banter. Now I wondered if it was the beginning of something more. Did he make her laugh like that often? Did he listen to her more than I did? Did he see something in her? I was too preoccupied to notice. The irony was almost unbearable. Here I was, supposedly providing her with a life of luxury, a life I was barely holding together, while Leo, the man I couldn't even pay, was perhaps providing her with something far more valuable. Attention, genuine connection, a sense of groundedness. He literally worked the earth. A stark contrast to my abstract world of numbers and algorithms. Maybe that's what she craved, something real. I had been so consumed by my own panic, my own secrets, that I hadn't seen the person right beside me, slipping away. I was too busy fighting fires in my business to notice the quiet erosion happening in my own home. My financial struggles weren't just about money. They were about my mental bandwidth, my emotional availability. They drained me, leaving little left for Sarah. I pushed her away without realizing it, absorbed in my own anxieties. And Leo, he was just always there, a steady, predictable presence in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. He was the one constant. Maybe that's what Sarah saw in him. Not just a gardener, but a stable, uncomplicated alternative to my increasingly complicated, dishonest life. He represented the opposite of everything I had become. Simple, honest, connected to the earth, not the volatile stock market. The stack of unpaid invoices from Leo, still sitting in that drawer somewhere, felt like a monument to my failures. Not just financial ones, but personal. The failure to be honest with Sarah, the failure to address my problems head-on, the failure to see the cracks forming in my own carefully constructed facade. And now, the ultimate failure. Losing her to the very man I had wronged. The secret had not just gnawed at me, it had eaten away at my life, leaving nothing but an empty shell. And the silence from Leo, his quiet acceptance of not being paid, was now the loudest accusation of all. He didn't tell her, but she found out anyway. Or did she? That question was still a raw, open wound in my mind. The house felt like a tomb. Every echo of my footsteps, every creak of the floorboards was amplified in the oppressive silence. Sarah scent, a mix of expensive perfume and something uniquely hers, still lingered faintly in the bedroom, a cruel phantom. I walked through the rooms, touching her things, a silk scarf draped over a chair, a half-read book on her nightstand, as if she might materialize from the ether. But she didn't. She was gone. My mind was a chaotic storm. Why Leo? Why him? Was it a calculated betrayal or a desperate act? My initial shock slowly morphed into a simmering anger, laced with a potent dose of self-pity. How could she do this? After everything we built? After all the years? Then the insidious whisper started. What if it was my fault? What if my secrets, my financial dishonesty, pushed her to this extreme? I started to scrutinize Sarah's character in my mind. Was she always like this? Had I been blind? She was always drawn to simplicity, to nature. She loved our garden, truly loved it. She often said it was her sanctuary. Leo was a part of that sanctuary. He represented a world so different from mine. My world was abstract. Numbers, deals, intangible wealth. His was tangible. Soil, plants, growth. Was she tired of the artificiality of my life? Tired of the constant striving, the endless pursuit of more? I remembered a conversation from months ago, one I had dismissed at the time. We were at a charity gala, surrounded by people who looked and talked just like me. Sarah had squeezed my hand a little too tightly and whispered, "Sometimes I wish we could just sell everything and live in a small cottage, grow our own food." I'd laughed, kissed her forehead and said, "Darling, you'd miss the designer shoes too much." She hadn't smiled back. I hadn't thought about it again until now. Was that her fantasy? A life with a gardener? The thought twisted in my gut. It wasn't just the fact that she left, it was who she left with. The man who represented everything I wasn't, and everything I had neglected. He was the antithesis of my corporate world. And the fact that I owed him money, that I had been exploiting him, added a layer of profound shame to the entire ordeal. It felt like cosmic justice, swift and brutal. What about Leo? What kind of man was he? Quiet? Yes. Hardworking, absolutely. But what else? I realized with a sickening jolt that I knew almost nothing about him. I never asked. I never cared to. He was a service, a part of the house's operating cost. I saw him as a tool, not a person. And now that tool had walked off with my wife. I wondered if Leo even knew about my financial troubles, beyond the missing payment. Did he sense the desperation in my eyes, the forced cheerfulness in my voice? Did he see the cracks in my veneer? And if he did he tell Sarah? Or did she figure it out herself? Maybe she saw the mounting tension, the late nights, the way I flinched every time the phone rang with an unknown number. Perhaps she connected the dots between my growing stress and the quiet, unpaid gardener. I had to do something. But what? Call the police? No, she wasn't kidnapped. She left a note. A note that explicitly told me not to look for her. Confront Leo? How? Where would I even find him? He didn't have a permanent address I knew of. Just a P.O. box for his invoices. And how do you confront a man who just ran off with your wife, when you owe him 3 months of wages? The shame of that alone was crippling. It stripped away any moral high ground I might have had. I walked into Sarah's studio, a bright, airy room she used for her painting. It was neat, as always. On her easel, an unfinished canvas, a sprawling landscape full of vibrant greens and blues. My garden painted by my wife, tended by the man she ran off with. A final, silent mockery. I saw a small, leather-bound journal on her desk. My first instinct was to open it, to search for answers, for clues. But I hesitated. It felt like a violation, even now. Besides, what if I found something I couldn't unsee? What if it confirmed my worst fears, or revealed a deeper unhappiness I had willfully ignored? The silence pressed in again. It was the sound of my life unraveling thread by thread, the silence of a future that no longer existed. The silence of a home that was no longer a home. Just a very expensive, very empty house. I tried to recall the last truly happy moment with Sarah. It was hard. Everything felt tainted now, seen through the bitter lens of betrayal. Was she always planning this? Was Leo always in the background, a silent predator, waiting for his moment? Or was he just a simple man who offered a hand? And she, feeling adrift, grasped it. The questions swirled, leaving me dizzy and nauseated. My phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button. How could I explain this? Mom, Sarah left. With the gardener. And by the way, I haven't paid him in 3 months. The words sounded absurd, like a bad sitcom plot. I let it ring. I couldn't face anyone yet. Not until I understood what had happened, what I had done. And the weight of those unpaid wages. That secret shame was a suffocating blanket, making it impossible to breathe, impossible to think clearly. This was just the beginning of the unraveling, and I knew deep down that it was going to get a lot worse before it got any better. If it ever got better, sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a twisted montage of Sarah's laughing face, Leo's stoic profile, and a constantly draining bank account. I woke up with a jolt, heart pounding, the bitter taste of betrayal and self-recrimination filling my mouth. The house was still quiet, the silence now a familiar, unwelcome companion. I started walking through the rooms again, but this time with a different purpose. I was looking for echoes, for fragments of a past I had clearly misread. Every object, every space seemed to hold a new, sinister meaning. The framed photo on the mantelpiece of Sarah and me on our wedding day, once a symbol of eternal love, now felt like a cruel joke. Her smile seemed forced, my arm around her possessive. Was she already unhappy then? I went to the garden, the scene of the perceived crime. The roses were in full bloom thanks to Leo's tireless work. Their beauty felt like a taunt. I remembered countless evenings Sarah spent out here, often alone, sometimes with a book. I'd occasionally join her for a few minutes, then drift back inside, drawn by the siren call of my laptop, my business, my increasingly desperate attempts to stay afloat. How much time did she spend out here with Leo? Just talking, while I was inside, oblivious. A specific memory surfaced, sharp and clear, a few weeks ago, a late afternoon. I was on a call, pacing the living room. Through the glass doors, I saw Sarah and Leo. She was pointing to a patch of wilting hydrangeas, her hand gesturing gracefully. He was listening, his head slightly tilted, a rare smile playing on his lips. They were close, closer than I would have expected for an employer and employee. I remembered a flicker of annoyance then. He was supposed to be working, not chatting. I dismissed it, telling myself it was Sarah being charming and Leo being polite. Now, it felt like a silent, intimate moment I had been excluded from, perhaps intentionally. Another echo, Sarah's sudden enthusiasm for gardening tools. She'd bought a new pair of pruning shears, saying Leo had recommended them. A specific brand, expensive. At the time, I thought it was just her embracing a hobby. Now, it felt like a connection, a shared interest fostered by him. She'd always been more interested in interior design than dirt. The shame of the unpaid wages gnawed at me with renewed ferocity. It wasn't just a financial oversight. It was a character flaw, a sign of my desperation, my dishonesty. Did Leo use it against me? "Your husband can't even pay me," did he whisper to her. What kind of man is that? The thought made me sick. It was a narrative he could easily spin, a powerful weapon against my image, against my marriage. He could paint me as a fraud, and he would have been right. The betrayal wasn't just Sarah leaving. It was the specific humiliating nature of it. It wasn't some hotshot CEO or a rich playboy. It was Leo, the quiet, humble gardener I couldn't even pay. It felt like a deliberate insult, a public declaration of my inadequacy. She chose the man who worked for me, the man I was exploiting. It was the ultimate dethroning. I felt a desperate need to talk to someone, anyone. But who? My business partners. They'd see the cracks in my facade, and my already precarious financial situation would crumble entirely. My family? My mother would be devastated. My father furious. They had always believed in my success, never questioning the gleaming exterior. How could I tell them the truth? That I was broke and my wife had run off with the gardener I hadn't paid. It was too much. The humiliation was too great. I tried calling Sarah's phone again. Straight to voicemail. No surprise there. I tried Leo's number, which I found buried in my old contacts, attached to his invoice records. It rang once, twice, then a generic voicemail message. "The person you're trying to reach is unavailable." Not a personal message, no name, just a blank wall. They were gone, vanished without a trace, leaving me alone in this monument to my failures. The house felt like a cage, albeit a luxurious one. Every corner, every object seemed to whisper their names, their laughter, their secret conversations. I pictured them together, somewhere simple, uncomplicated. Maybe a small apartment or a rented cottage. No grand garden, no mansion, no endless bill. Just them and the quiet dignity of honest work. And maybe, just maybe, the truth. My mind kept circling back to the unpaid wages. That was the central knot in this tangle of betrayal. If Leo had told Sarah, it explained everything. It explained why she left with him, why she was so cold, why she explicitly told me not to look for her. She found out I was a fraud, a liar, a man living beyond his means, exploiting his workers. It would be the ultimate justification for her leaving. It would make me the villain unequivocally. And the agonizing part was, a part of me knew I deserved it. I had been dishonest. I had been a coward. But what if he didn't tell her? What if she left for other reasons entirely? Reasons that had nothing to do with my financial situation, and the unpaid wages were just a cruel coincidence. an extra layer of pain on an already devastating wound. That thought was almost worse. It meant my secret, my shame, was still my own. A private torment, and her leaving was purely about me and her, not about me and Leo. It meant I was failing her on a level even deeper than finances. The sun started to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. The garden, Leo's masterpiece, looked peaceful, serene. But inside, I was anything but. I was a maelstrom of regret, suspicion, and crushing loneliness. The echoes of their secret conversations, real or imagined, bounced off the empty walls of my home. My suspicions, once fleeting, were now concrete, solidifying into a terrible truth. They had built something, a connection, right under my nose. And I was too blind, too selfish, too consumed by my own unraveling to see it. Days turned into a week. The initial shock had dulled, replaced by a dull ache, a constant thrum of anxiety. The house was spotless thanks to the cleaning crew who still came weekly, unaware of the domestic earthquake that had struck. The silence remained, punctuated only by my own desperate thoughts. I ate little, slept less, existing in a fog of what-ifs and should-haves. I needed answers. I couldn't just sit here festering in my own misery and speculation. My first thought was to hire a private investigator, but that felt excessive, and frankly, I couldn't afford it. Then I remembered Maria, Sarah's closest friend, almost like a sister. Maria knew everything about Sarah. Maybe she knew something about Leo too. Maybe she even knew about my financial woes. I called Maria. My voice sounded raspy, unfamiliar. Maria, it's me. I need to talk to you. It's about Sarah. There was a pause, a hesitant breath on the other end. I know, Robert, she said, her voice soft, full of pity. Sarah called me a few days ago. My heart leaped. She did? What did she say? Where is she? She just said she was leaving. That she couldn't stay. She said she was sorry. Did she mention Leo? Did she say where they were going? My voice was desperate, pleading. Another pause. She just said she was with someone who made her feel seen, and that she needed a simpler life. Maria's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the underlying tension. Did she tell you about the money? That I hadn't paid Leo? I blurted it out, the shame burning my cheeks. It was out. The secret was out. Maria was silent for a long moment. Then, no, Robert. She didn't mention anything about that. I didn't even know you hadn't paid him. Her tone was genuinely surprised. This threw me. If Sarah didn't tell her closest friend, then maybe Leo hadn't told Sarah. Or maybe Sarah just didn't care about the money. Maybe it really was about something else. I felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by the cold reality. It didn't matter why she left, or what she knew. She was gone. And Leo was gone with her. But Maria's words gave me a new focus. If Sarah wasn't leaving because of my financial mess, then what was the real reason? I tried another route. Leo had a small network of other gardeners he sometimes worked with on bigger projects. I remembered one name, Marco, from an invoice once. I found Marco's number and called him. He was hesitant, clearly surprised by my call. Marco, it's Robert. Leo's client. Have you heard from Leo recently? Leo? Oh, he said he was taking some time off, a long break. Marco sounded uncomfortable. A long break. Did he say where he was going? No, sir. Just said he needed a change. Did he mention anything about unpaid wages? About me owing him money? I pressed, my voice tight. Marco cleared his throat. He did mention something, sir. Just once. Said you were a bit behind, but he didn't seem too bothered. said he understood things could be tough. My blood ran cold, he did know. And he didn't seem bothered, or was he just good at hiding it? Did he say anything else? Anything about Sarah? Sarah? Why would he mention your wife? Marco's confusion seemed genuine. Look, sir, I gotta go. Got a big job today. He hung up before I could ask anything else. So Leo knew about the money. He'd even mentioned it to a colleague, but he hadn't seemed bothered. And he hadn't mentioned Sarah? This was getting more confusing, more painful. Was it possible that Leo genuinely didn't use my financial secret as leverage? Was it possible that he was just a man caught up in a passionate affair, and the unpaid wages were merely an unfortunate side note? A detail that added to my humiliation, but wasn't the driving force behind Sarah's departure. This ambiguity was agonizing. If he hadn't told her, then her leaving was entirely about me and her relationship. It was about my emotional distance, my hidden life, my failures as a partner, not just as an employer. The thought was almost more devastating than if he had told her. If he had, at least I could blame him, blame the situation. But if he hadn't, then the blame fell squarely on me. I decided I had to see it. Not for a confrontation, not for answers necessarily, but for closure. I needed to see them together, to make it real. I drove aimlessly for hours, the luxury car, feeling like a cage. I visited all their old haunts, places Sarah loved, the botanical gardens, the farmer's market, her favorite obscure coffee shop. Nothing. Then a thought struck me. Where would Leo take someone if he wanted a simpler life? A natural one? I remembered Sarah talking about a small, rustic cabin retreat in the mountains, a place she always wanted to visit, but I had dismissed as too primitive. It was a 2-hour drive, nestled in a quiet, secluded valley. A long shot, but worth. The drive was tense, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my stomach churning. As I neared the retreat, a sense of dread washed over me. I drove slowly through the winding gravel path, past small, unassuming cabins, each nestled discreetly among the trees. And then I saw it. A familiar car, Leo's old beat-up pickup truck, parked in front of a modest wooden cabin. My heart seized. It was them. I pulled over, hidden by a cluster of tall pines. I watched, my breath catching in my throat. Cabin door opened and Sarah emerged, wearing simple jeans and a plain sweater, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She looked different, relaxed. Her face was free of the subtle tension I now realized had been etched there for months. She was laughing, a sound I hadn't heard from her in so long. Leo followed her, carrying a small basket. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Their hands touched, a brief, tender moment. They didn't speak about me. They didn't reference my money. They just looked at each other, a quiet understanding passing between them. It wasn't the dramatic, vengeful confrontation I had half expected, half dreaded. It was just life. Their new life. Simple, quiet, intimate. I watched them walk hand in hand into the forest, disappearing from view. They looked happy. Genuinely happy. And in that moment the anger faded, replaced by a profound, desolate sadness. It wasn't about the money anymore, not really. It was about what I had lost, what I had failed to see, what I had failed to be. They didn't even notice me. Hidden in the shadows, a ghost from a past they had clearly left behind. Confrontation I had sought wasn't a shouting match. It was this silent, heartbreaking observation. And it was all the answer I needed. Seeing them, happy and untroubled, was a raw, searing wound. But it also brought a strange clarity. The immediate emotional storm of betrayal began to recede. leaving behind the chilling reality of my financial situation. It wasn't just Leo's unpaid wages anymore. That was just the tip of a rapidly melting iceberg. Shave at the house, the silence no longer felt like a tomb, but like a vast echoing chamber, amplifying the sounds of my own unraveling. I sat at my desk, the one I had once used to sign million-dollar deals, and pulled out the file I had avoided for months. It contained a neatly organized stack of red flag documents, overdue notices, final warnings, eviction threats. The business was bleeding. My tech startup, once so promising, had flatlined. The last big deal had collapsed spectacularly. Clients were pulling out, employees were leaving, sensing the ship was sinking. I had been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, juggling credit lines, taking out desperate loans, all while maintaining the illusion of success. The house itself, once a symbol of my achievement, was now a millstone around my neck. The mortgage was astronomical. The property taxes were crippling. The maintenance, the staff, the utilities, it was all a bottomless pit. Leo's 3 months of unpaid wages, while significant for him, were a fraction of the total debt I now faced. My entire world was built on a crumbling foundation of borrowed money and desperate lies. My personal savings were gone. My investments were worthless. I was effectively bankrupt, living in a palace of debt. The weight of it was suffocating. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My mind was a constant loop of numbers, deadlines, and a crushing realization that I had built a life I couldn't afford, all to impress a world that didn't care, and a wife who had clearly seen through it anyway. The stress manifested physically. Headaches pounded behind my eyes. My hands often trembled. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, gaunt, hollow-eyed, a haunted man. I had always prided myself on my financial acumen, my ability to turn ideas into profit. Now, I was a failure, a fraud. The thought of losing everything, of selling the house, the cars, all the symbols of my life, filled me with a deep existential dread. Who would I be without them? Who was Robert without his empire? I started to make desperate phone calls. To my bank, negotiating for extensions. To my few remaining clients, pleading for new business. To former colleagues, subtly sounding them out for job opportunities. Something I never imagined I'd have to do. The answers were always the same. Tight market, no openings. Sorry to hear about your troubles. Pity, thinly veiled as professionalism. I thought about Sarah. If she had known about the extent of my financial ruin, would it have changed anything? Would she have stayed out of pity? Or would it have solidified her decision to leave even faster? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my secret had created a chasm between us. It wasn't just the money, it was the deception. I had chosen to carry this burden alone, to protect her from the harsh realities. And in doing so, I had pushed her away. The "he didn't tell her" part of the story continued to haunt me. Maria's genuine surprise suggested Leo hadn't used the unpaid wages as a weapon. And if he hadn't, then Sarah's reasons for leaving were deeper, more personal. They were about us, not about him and my financial misdeeds. This made the pain even sharper. It meant I had failed her, not just as a provider, but as a partner. I had been so consumed by my own financial panic that I had neglected her emotional needs, our connection. She sought simplicity, authenticity, and I was offering anything but. Thought of facing my creditors, of declaring bankruptcy, of dismantling the life I had so painstakingly constructed, was terrifying. But the alternative, this slow, suffocating death by debt, was worse. I had to confront it. I had to stop pretending. The first step I knew was admitting the full scope of the disaster. Not just to myself, but to the world. I started listing assets, calculating liabilities. The numbers were staggering. My net worth was a negative figure, a cruel joke. The beautiful, sprawling garden, tended by Leo's diligent hands, suddenly felt like a symbol of all my unsustainable extravagances. Every rose bush, every perfectly trimmed hedge represented money I didn't have, money I owed. The silence of the house was now filled with the frantic clicking of my calculator, the rustle of papers, the soft scratching of my pen as I listed my debts. Each number was a stab, each creditor's name a reminder of my failure. Leo's name was on that list too. 3 months. That was just a drop in this ocean of debt. But it was a drop that symbolized so much more. My hidden shame, my broken promises, and the quiet, devastating betrayal that had just walked out of my life, hand in hand with the man I had wronged. The weight was unbearable, but I knew with a grim determination that I had to carry it or be crushed by it entirely. Days turned into weeks. The initial paralysis slowly gave way to a grim determination. I still felt the deep ache of loss, but the raw anger had mellowed into a weary sadness. I was forced to face the harsh realities of my financial situation, spending hours on calls with lawyers and accountants, dissecting the carcass of my business. It was humiliating but necessary. As I wrestled with the numbers, my mind often drifted back to Sarah. The image of her with Leo in the mountains, so relaxed, so genuinely happy, played on a loop. It was a stark contrast to the Sarah I had been living with for the past year, subtly withdrawn, a little distant, her laughter less frequent. Had I been so blind, so self-absorbed? I started to reevaluate our relationship, not through the lens of my current pain, but through a more objective, if still wounded, perspective. Sarah had always been the more grounded one. She loved simple pleasures, a walk in the woods, a quiet evening with a book, the joy of watching something grow. My life, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of meetings, travel, high-stakes negotiations. I was always chasing the next deal, the next big win. I thought I was building a grand life for us, a life she deserved. But maybe, just maybe, it was a life I wanted, and she was simply enduring it. I recalled evenings where she tried to talk to me about her day, about something mundane, but meaningful to her, a new recipe, a philosophical podcast, a volunteer project she was involved in. And I'd nod, distracted, my mind already back on a spreadsheet, an email, a looming deadline. How many times had I said, "That's nice, honey," without truly listening? How many times had I chosen my laptop over her quiet presence? The gardener, Leo, embodied everything I wasn't. He was present. He worked with his hands. He dealt with tangible things. He nurtured life. I was always chasing something abstract, something just out of reach, always looking ahead, never truly appreciating what was right in front of me. Perhaps Sarah had found in him a quiet strength, an authenticity that my increasingly fabricated life lacked. One afternoon, rummaging through Sarah's nightstand drawer, a place I had avoided, I found a small leather-bound journal, the same one I had hesitated to open before. This time, I didn't hesitate. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, more a collection of thoughts, poems, and musings. I flipped through the pages, her elegant handwriting flowing across the cream-colored paper. Most of it was personal, too intimate to read without feeling like a trespasser. But then I found a passage, dated about 6 months ago. "The garden feels like the only real place anymore. Everything else is just noise. Robert is so busy. Always busy. I know he's trying to build something wonderful for us, but sometimes I feel like I am losing him. Losing us, I miss the quiet moments, the easy laughter. He's carrying a burden, I can feel it, but he won't share it. He pulls away, it's like he's living in a different world than I am. Sometimes I wonder if he even sees me anymore. Not the real me, just the idea of me. Another entry, more recent, just a few weeks before she left. Leo was talking about his childhood today, growing up on a farm. So simple, so grounded. He truly loves the earth. Tea here is a piece about him. A quiet strength. He just listens. No judgment, no advice. Just listens. It's a strange feeling, to feel seen by a virtual stranger, when the person closest to you feels so far away. I don't know what to do. My breath hitched. It wasn't about the money, not directly. It was about me. My distance, my inability to share my burdens, my focus on external success over internal connection. Leo was a symptom, not the cause. He represented a stark contrast to my emotional unavailability. He was the listener, the present one, the grounded one. I had been so consumed by my financial woes, so determined to hide them, that I had neglected the most important relationship in my life. The journal didn't mention my unpaid wages. Not once. Sarah's internal struggle was about emotional connection, about feeling lost and unseen. Leo simply provided what I was no longer capable of providing. That he didn't tell her, part took on a different meaning now. It wasn't about Leo's integrity. It was about my own self-inflicted wounds. My financial secret was my burden, a symbol of my detachment, not a weapon wielded by him. A wave of profound regret washed over me, deeper and more painful than any anger. I had lost her, not to a cunning seducer or a financial scheme, but to my own failures as a partner. I had been so busy building a life, I forgot to live it. So busy accumulating wealth, I forgot to nurture love. The journal was a mirror, reflecting my own shortcomings. And in that mirror, I saw not a betrayed victim, but a man who had slowly, unknowingly, pushed away the very person he loved most. Glimmer of understanding was agonizing, but it was also a necessary step towards healing. The journal entries haunted me. They replayed in my mind, a constant reminder of my failures, my blindness. The anger and blame I had initially directed at Sarah and Leo began to recede, replaced by a deep sense of accountability. The financial burden was still crushing, but the emotional landscape of my life felt clearer, if still barren. I decided to meet Maria again, this time with a different approach. I needed to understand Sarah's perspective fully, to hear anything else she might have said to her friend. Maria met me at a quiet cafe, her eyes still full of that same soft pity. "Maria," I began, "I read Sarah's journal." I saw her flinch, a brief flicker of surprise, then understanding. She felt unseen. And I know it's my fault. I was so caught up in everything, especially the business, and well, the money issues. I hesitated, then pressed on. "Did she ever talk to you about Leo? Not just as the gardener, but personally?" Maria took a deep breath. "Robert, Sarah was lonely. For a long time. She loved you, I truly believe that. But you became so distant, so closed off. It was like she was living with a stranger. She tried to talk to you, you know, about the stress, about how much you were working, about how you weren't really there anymore. But you always brushed her off." "I was trying to protect her," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "from the financial problems." Maria shook her head gently. Protection or avoidance? She needed a partner, someone to share things with, good or bad. not a provider who kept her in the dark. She felt you were carrying a huge weight, but you wouldn't let her help. That's what hurt her the most, the wall you built. Then, Maria dropped a new piece of information, a detail I hadn't considered. You know, Sarah always talked about Leo with a lot of respect. She admired his simplicity, his dedication. She said he reminded her of her own father, who was also a very humble, hard-working man. She always said he was so quiet, but he listened. A new light dawned. Sarah's father had died when she was young. He was a simple carpenter, a man of few words, but immense presence. He had been her rock. Leo, the quiet, grounded man who listened. It wasn't a grand romance driven by passion or revenge. It was something far more profound and heartbreaking. It was about connection and a yearning for something authentic, something she missed. Did Leo know about your money problems? Maria asked, then quickly added, Sarah never said a word to me about it, not even after she left. I nodded, the shame still present, but less sharp. I was behind on his pay. For 3 months, I kept putting it off, hoping things would turn around. I thought he might have used that against me, told Sarah. Maria looked at me, her gaze full of a quiet understanding. Robert, Sarah isn't the kind of person who would be swayed by that. If anything, she would have felt pity for Leo or tried to help him. And if she left you, it wasn't because you were broke. It was because she felt broken with you, because you pushed her away. She was looking for a partner, someone who was emotionally present, not someone who was hiding their entire life from her. This was the truth. The raw, unvarnished truth. My financial woes were my secret, my burden, my failure. They contributed to my emotional distance, which in turn pushed Sarah away. Leo hadn't needed to reveal my financial state to Sarah. My own actions had spoken louder than any words. He was merely there, a kind, silent presence offering a listening ear, a stark contrast to my closed-off existence. The relief that washed over me was unexpected. It was painful, yes, to accept such a harsh reality about myself, but it was also freeing. The blame was no longer scattered, a chaotic mess of suspicions. It was focused. It was on me. And with that came the possibility of change, of rebuilding, not just my finances, but myself. I realized that the shocking hook of my story, Sarah leaving with the gardener I hadn't paid, was only shocking from my self-centered perspective. From Sarah's, it was likely a desperate escape. A flight towards authenticity and emotional connection. Away from a life that had become a gilded cage of lies and distance. The unpaid wages were just another symptom of my spiraling control, my crumbling world, not the direct cause of her departure. Leo was simply the human embodiment of the simplicity and honesty she craved. The truth hurt deeply. It revealed my own shortcomings, my own neglect. But it also offered a path forward. I couldn't undo the past. I couldn't bring Sarah back, but I could learn from this devastating experience. I could become a more honest person, a more present one. And I could finally truly begin the long, difficult process of picking up the pieces, knowing that the foundation of my life had to be rebuilt on truth, not illusion. The veil had been lifted, and I finally saw the full, painful picture. The days after my conversation with Maria were a blur of action. The emotional clarity, though painful, fueled a new kind of resolve. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. First thing I did was call my lawyer and accountant, instructing them to prepare for bankruptcy proceedings. It was humiliating but a necessary step. My mansion, the symbol of my failed empire, was put on the market. The cars would follow. It was a dismantling piece by painful piece, of the life I had so desperately clung to. The process was long and arduous. Every meeting, every signature felt like a concession of defeat. But with each step, a tiny bit of the crushing weight lifted. The debt was still there, but now it was out in the open, being dealt with instead of silently suffocating me. I moved out of the mansion and into a modest rented apartment in a less glamorous part of town. The change was stark. No grand gardens, no sweeping views. Just four walls, a small kitchen and a quiet neighborhood. And ironically, it felt more like home than the opulent emptiness of the mansion ever did in those final months. I had to find work. My once shining resume now looked like a testament to a failed venture. I swallowed my pride, applied for entry-level positions, took on consulting gigs far below my usual pay grade. The work was demanding, often frustrating, but it was honest. Every dollar I earned was real, not borrowed, not fake. It was a slow climb, an uphill battle, but I felt a nascent sense of dignity returning. I also started addressing the emotional wreckage. I began seeing a therapist, something I would have scoffed at a year ago. It was hard, peeling back the layers of my pride, my insecurities, my fear of failure. I talked about my parents' expectations, my relentless drive for success, my inability to be vulnerable. And yes, I talked about Sarah and Leo and the unpaid wages which still stung, but now felt less like a betrayal and more like a symbol of my own spiraling control. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I had neglected in my pursuit of wealth. I was honest with them about my situation, about the bankruptcy, about Sarah. Some were shocked, some sympathetic. A few drifted away, unable to cope with my downfall. But the ones who stayed, the ones who listened without judgment, were the true friends. Their support, small as it sometimes was, meant everything. One afternoon, months after everything happened, I was at a local park, reading a book. I looked up and saw them, Sarah and Leo. They were walking hand in hand, a dog trotting happily beside them. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation at the mountain cabin. This was just a casual encounter. Sarah looked healthy, vibrant, her hair shorter, her face relaxed. Leo looked, well, like Leo. Still quiet, still grounded, but with a lightness I hadn't seen before. They stopped at a bench and sat down, talking softly, the dog resting its head on Leo's lap. My heart gave a familiar pang, but it was softer this time, less sharp. I felt a fleeting mix of nostalgia, sadness, and a strange sense of peace. They looked genuinely happy. They had found their path, and I realized, was finding mine. They didn't see me. I was just another face in the park, a ghost from their past, and that was okay. The thought of the unpaid wages surfaced, a brief, bitter whisper. I still owed him. I hadn't forgotten it was on my bankruptcy forms, a legitimate debt, but it no longer felt like the central villain of my story. It was just another consequence of my choices, another piece of the unraveling, and for the first time I felt a flicker of acceptance. Acceptance of my mistakes, acceptance of the loss, and acceptance of the difficult, but necessary journey I was on. I watched them for a few more minutes, then quietly gathered my things and walked away. No need for a dramatic encounter, no need for answers. I had found my own truth, bitter as it was. I was picking up the pieces, slowly, painstakingly, one day at a time. The mansion, the wealth, the wife, the gardener, they were all part of a past that had crumbled. But the person I was becoming, the lessons I was learning, felt more valuable than any empire I had ever tried to build. The wound was deep, but it was finally starting to heal. It had been a year and a half since Sarah left. The mansion was sold, a sterile transaction that finalized the end of an era. The luxury cars were gone. My business was formally dissolved. The bankruptcy proceedings were messy, painful, but ultimately, they brought a kind of closure. I was starting over, literally from scratch. I was living in a smaller, older house now, one I could truly afford. No sprawling garden, just a small patch of grass and a few hardy bushes. I worked at a company that manufactured eco-friendly building materials, a far cry from the high-flying tech world I once inhabited. The work was steady, meaningful, and most importantly, honest. I was learning about sustainability, about building things that lasted, not just fleeting trends. My financial health was slowly improving. I was diligently paying down my debts, a little at a time. Leo's unpaid wages were still a line item in my personal ledger, a promise I intended to fulfill, even if it meant reaching out to him directly, someday when the time was right. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about integrity. The raw pain of Sarah's departure had softened. It was still there, a phantom ache that surfaced in quiet moments, a scar on my heart. But it no longer consumed me. I had come to terms with the fact that our relationship had ended long before Leo entered the picture, as more than just a gardener. It ended when I chose to build walls instead of bridges, when I prioritized appearances over authenticity, when I let my own fears consume me. I sometimes wondered about Sarah and Leo. I imagined them in their simple life, rooted in nature, far from the pressures of the city. I hoped they were happy. I truly did. My own happiness was no longer contingent on theirs, or on my past. It was being built brick by painful brick, on the foundation of self-awareness and hard work. One sunny Saturday, I was at a local farmer's market, something I never would have done in my previous life. I was picking out fresh vegetables, enjoying the vibrant chaos when I saw them. Sarah and Leo, they were a few stalls away, buying flowers. Sarah had a wide-brimmed hat on, her arm linked through Leo's. He was smiling, talking to the flower vendor, a genuine, easy smile that transformed his usually reserved face. Sarah looked radiant, her eyes sparkling with a quiet contentment. They looked so natural together, so completely at ease. My heart gave a familiar tug, but it wasn't the sharp, agonizing twist of betrayal anymore. It was more like a nostalgic ache, a quiet acknowledgement of a past that was beautiful in its own way, but ultimately not meant to last. I watched them for a moment, unseen. There was no bitterness, no anger. Just a quiet acceptance. They were a part of my story, a painful but essential catalyst for my own transformation. I took a deep breath, filled with the scent of fresh produce and blooming flowers. I was a different man now. I had learned the brutal lessons of dishonesty, of emotional neglect, of living beyond my means. I understood now that true wealth wasn't measured in square footage or stock portfolios, but in authenticity, connection, and peace of mind. I still had a long way to go. The scars remained, but I was healing. I had faced my demons, dismantled my false empire, and was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding a life based on truth and integrity. The wound of Sarah and Leo running off, especially with the added sting of the unpaid wages, was a wound that might never fully disappear. It was a chapter in my story, a painful, necessary turning point. As I turned to leave the market, I glanced back one last time. Sarah and Leo were still there, laughing quietly, lost in their own world. They were happy, and for the first time in a very long time, so was I. My new beginning wasn't grand, wasn't flashy, but it was real. And that was enough.